Galatians 5:14 says, "For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself." Welcome to the sermon, Hypocrisy Interrupting. Interesting title. There's another occasion in the New Testament where we hear, "Love your neighbor as yourself." And it's in Galatians chapter 5, verse 14, where Paul will say, again what we read in Romans 13, "For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself." So I want to go over that through the next Sundays. But before that, we need to understand what's going on in chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, to then get to chapter 5 and understand why is Paul saying that, and what is the application and the practical things that we can do in our life and that we can understand and learn from Paul of why he's saying, love your neighbor as yourself, is the fulfillment of the law. The first thing that happened is that Paul is writing to the Galatians, all right? And something is going on in the church in Galatia, and that's the main reason why Paul is writing this letter. We can see in chapter 1, verse 6 and 7 that it says, "I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel." Verse 7, "which is really not gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ." So the first thing that we notice here is that Paul is he is astonished. There's something going on and he cannot understand why that is happening. And the problem is that the gospel of Christ is being attacked or in danger because something is going on that so far we don't know, but that's an important matter for Paul. And then we see in verse 10 that he will say, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ." So we have two main issues. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Someone is preaching a different gospel, or some group of people are preaching a different gospel, and there are people that are trying to please people. So it sounds like because if people are trying to please people, something is happening with the gospel of Jesus Christ and they are leading astray themselves and other people. And that's something that Paul is we need to address this thing. That's one of the first verses that he's going to introduce in the letter. Normally he will go and do a blessing. He will say something beautiful to the people. But in this case, he just goes straight to the situation. "I am astonished." That's the first thing that he says. It's how is it possible that this is happening to you and to the church in Galatia? Those are the first words that he is saying. And then he says in chapter 2, verse 3 and 4. Okay, no, before that. So he says that. And then in chapter 2, the beginning of chapter 2, she's going to explain that at some point he went up to Jerusalem to talk with the leaders of the church, of the Jerusalem church, because the apostles were in Jerusalem back then. And he went over there to have a conversation about the situation that is happening and what he's talking about in chapter 1. And he said that he went up to Jerusalem, he talked to everybody, to the elders and to the apostles, and they come to the conclusion that he was the one who was responsible to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. He has the authority to say some things. And there was some issue with the law of Moses, that they came to the conclusion that the Gentiles didn't have to go back to the law of Moses. They didn't have to fulfill the law of Moses. They didn't have to obey to the law of Moses. So he's explaining that. And then we have chapter 2, verse 3 through 5, and he says, "Yet not even Titus, who was with me, was compelled to be circumcised, even though he was a Greek." So he was not a Jew, but in the situation he was not asked to be circumcised. Verse 4, "This matter arose because some false believers had infiltrated our ranks to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus, and to make us slaves. We did not give in to them for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you." So some people want to take them who are now in freedom back to slavery, and the reference is to the law of Moses. Because when Jesus came, he took that slavery that they have under the law of Moses, and now they have the opportunity to live freely in Jesus Christ, in the grace and the forgiveness and the redemption of Jesus Christ. But now there are some people infiltrating, there are some spy, according to Paul's words, that are getting into the situation that they're asking the Gentiles to go back to that. And Paul cannot understand. Actually, that was the first council in Jerusalem. You can see that in Acts chapter 13. That was the first meeting that they had all together because that was happening. And Paul was saying, this cannot happen. There's no way that we're going back to slavery. There's no way that we're going back to that now Jesus has taken away from us. So the situation is that there are people that are preaching a different gospel because there are people that are trying to please people. And that's kind of like the situation. And then he says, we don't want to go back to slavery. Why are people in the midst of this group that is trying to take us back to that? And it's like when we find Jesus and we encounter him and we have carried some burdens, some like sins, some things, some stains, some things that we don't like, that we're not proud of. And then Jesus frees us from that. But for some reason, there are some infiltrated people, some spies that want to take us back to that. Sometimes it's external people. Sometimes it's just people in our minds. Sometimes it's just ourselves. That even if we have gotten freedom from Jesus Christ, for some reason we want to go back to that. And I think it's because we are used to that. I think because we are so used to living that way, that we're so used to living that particular way, and I'm going to talk about that this coming Sunday, that they were so used to live like Jews that now it's hard for them to give up to that and just believe that they are just free, that they don't have to obey the law to be righteous, that they are righteous because of what Jesus did on the cross. But they're so used to that it's hard for them to believe that there is freedom in Jesus Christ, that there is another way to live in Jesus Christ. So they're so used to that they just want to go back to that, and they want to bring other people into that, including people that were never part of the law of Moses, like the Gentiles. And they want to bring people back to that. And it happens, and I have seen that in myself and in other people, when there is freedom in Jesus Christ, there is love in Jesus Christ, but for some reason we cannot accept that. It's hard for us to understand that we have been forgiven. It's hard for us to understand that we are loved. It's hard for us to understand that we now have a connection and a relationship with God. Because maybe our minds are still in the state of mind that were before. In a state of mind that we think that we don't deserve that we're not worthy of that we need to do something to gain that. But it wasn't because of what we could do. It was of what Jesus did on the cross. But we want to stay there, and I think it's because we are so used to that. We were so used to live life in that way that we think that's the only way. We don't see another way to live life. And when Jesus comes and he says, I love you, you're loved, you're forgiven, you're saved, go in peace, like what he said to some of the people that he healed, I don't think that people actually left that place in peace. I think a lot of them were like in a war inside of their mind. First, what's going on? Second, forgiven. I wasn't expecting that. And then saved? What are you talking about? There was no peace. Or probably some of them were like just in peace. But I think that's the situation that is happening here. Okay? And Paul is like, I'm astonished that you want to go back to that. I'm astonished that you want to be there again. When it didn't work, it didn't make us right. We couldn't have a relationship with God based on the law of Moses. Why do we want to go back to that? And why are we forcing other people to go back to that if it's not working? And we have freedom in Jesus Christ. And then this whole thing is going to make more sense in the book of Galatians, because then something happened between Paul and Peter. And it was after the meeting that they had in Jerusalem. And then we're going to see that. Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. When Cephas came to Antioch, and that's Peter, I opposed him to his face, because he stood condemned. It was something that for Paul, I need to address this right now. This is not an issue that we can have like a sweet conversation. Let's just handle this in a different way. It was like, what he's doing, I need to handle this right now, immediately. Verse 12. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles, because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. Verse 13. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy. So by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. So here's the situation. It looks like Peter was having a relationship with the Gentiles, and he was having fun with the Gentiles. And I was thinking, and I was picturing the story. Maybe the Gentiles was like, Peter, you want to play with us? Yeah, let's play. Peter, you want to eat pork chops with us? Yeah, sure, that's clean now. Let's do it. Peter, you want to hang out with us? Yes, let's do it. But when other people came, the same Gentiles were like, hey, Peter, you want to come play cards with us? I don't play cards. Whoa, what? People were like, what? Hey, Peter, we're going to have pork chops for tonight. What? That's unclean. What are you talking about? And we're like, what? Because now there were a group of people that were with Peter, that they are Jews, and Peter is like in the midst of that situation, and Peter is reacting in that way. And Paul knew about that thing. And Paul is like, there is no way that Peter is doing that. There's something condemning that Peter is doing that I need to address right now. Because he was doing something, but now he's doing something different. And the other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy. It's like when you are like in a church setting and you behave in a way, and you behave in a way. You try to, yeah. But then when you're with your friends, you behave in a completely different way. You start saying yes to things that you're not supposed to say yes. You start doing things that you're not supposed to do. You speak in a different way just because you're with your friends, And that's kind of like the situation. Peter is behaving in a way that doesn't match with the freedom that Jesus Christ has given to him and the relationship that he is now trying to have with the Gentiles. But his hypocrisy is bringing him to interact in one way when he's by himself, and in a different way when he is with his group of friends, Jews. It's like when we know we need and we want to do something, but what are they going to say? I know I need to do something, but what are they going to say? What are my group of friends, my old group of friends are going to say? What if they stop talking to me? What if they don't like me anymore? What if they don't want me in their life anymore? Because now I'm not acting like we were used to, And I put it in Peter's shoes, and that makes sense. I have been there. I don't want to do things that are probably going to take me to isolation, to places like that. But there's a spiritual thing that is happening in Peter and everybody's life that Jesus is trying to embrace and bring us together. But Peter is behaving in a different way, like when we do things that we're not supposed to do, but we do them just because we want to please people. I speak this way with them. Oh yeah, we call names and all that. Yeah, when we are this group of people, because I want to please them. I want them to be happy with me. I want them to be my friends. I don't want them to think, oh, now you're a Christian, so you don't take those words. I don't want that reaction, So yeah, I talk like you guys. Yeah, we behave like you guys. We do these things. Yeah, I'm so rude. And then you come to church and, oh, sorry. God bless you, sister. God bless you, brothers. I'm so delightful being here. It's like, what are you talking about? I guess the laugh is because we've been there. Oh, we know people. It's not us. I know a friend. I've been through something like that. And the problem is when you treat people in a way, good or bad, but pretend to be the opposite. When we live a life in private that doesn't match with our life, with our public life. And that's hypocrisy. That's what Paul is saying. Why are you doing that? Why are you going back to slavery? Why are you bringing other people back to slavery by doing that? And the person that is hypocrite, the definition is, go to the next slide, The Greek word for hypocrite is hypocritu. Hypocritu. It's kind of like the same word in English and Spanish. And there are like three different ways to translate that word. One way is to say one who answers or an interpreter. The second way is an actor or stage player. And the third one in biblical Greek is a dissembler, a pretender, or a hypocrite. So it's a person that is acting. It's like an actor. An actor receives a script, and then he goes and performs the script, and when you watch the movie, you believe in that person. You're not thinking that person is actually, whatever, Tom Cruise. You think he's the savior of the world or something like that, And that's that's the word that he's using for Peter and his friends. They are acting. They are pretending. They are interpreting something that they are not. In this case, what they are interpreting is something bad, but they are really not that. Because Peter was clean. Peter was saved. Peter was forgiven. Peter was with Jesus. He knew Jesus. He saw Jesus. He was forgiven by Jesus directly. He was asked by Jesus 3 times to go and love the people. So that's what's inside, but he is now showing something different. And Paul is like, there's no way that Peter can be doing that, because the problem is that he is letting astray and he's taking other people away from that. It's not just about him, it's about what he's doing to other people as well. And that's a hypocrite. And I wonder how many times I have been a hypocrite. And like interacting with people, like preaching. And that's what it says, an interpreter. It's like when you read something and you come and like try to portray it in a way, but maybe when I go back home, maybe when I'm by myself, I'm interacting in a different way with myself. I'm doing things in a different way. So the problem is not with who you are. The problem is with who you are pretending to be in different situations. If you are saved, if you were forgiven, why are you acting in that way? Why are you talking in that way? Why are you behaving in that way? Why are you going back to slavery? You were free from slavery. Why do you want to go back to that? And maybe my understanding of things like, I will say to Paul, I'm so used to that. I'm afraid. I'm going to talk about that next Sunday. These Sundays are going to be good, okay? By the way, come next Sunday. So I don't think the thing is just about pretending. Because, or like acting in a different way. Because there are some times that we are kind of like pretending. It's like when we're afraid, but we pretend that everything is okay, Maybe to control my family. Maybe to be okay, like there's an earthquake, but it's okay. When I'm feeling like no, it's not okay, I want to run. But I want to be like, when I'm talking to another person, the person is just crying, and I'm trying to pretend that everything is okay. When everything is not okay, I just want to start crying with you. But I just don't want to do it because I need to keep the conversation. I remember a conversation with Neve over here. She was crying so much, and I was like, I just want to cry and hug her and stop this whole thing, but I need to keep going, I don't think the problem is with that kind of pretending. The problem is when you're trying to be someone that you are not. That's the problem. If you are a person that are saved and you're behaving in a different way, that's the problem. If you're a person that has been forgiven and you're acting like an unforgiven person, that's the problem. When you're a person that have received the love of God and you are acting with hate and not love, that's the problem. And the problem also is when you're letting astray other people with you. That's even worse. That's the situation. That's what's happening. How can my actions preach something different, preach a different gospel? That's basically what Paul is asking to Peter. And that is basically what is talking to us, the book of Galatians. How can my pleasing people behavior preach a different gospel? That's also what's happening. Peter wants to please the Jews. Peter wants to please the Gentiles. But he found himself in the middle of the situation that he's just messing the whole thing up. Messing the gospel of Jesus, messing the whole situation, messing the gospel that the Gentiles have received, messing everything that Paul has been doing and have been working on. How can my pleasing people behavior can interfere between me and Jesus and his gospel and his freedom? And then, verse 14. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of them all. And that's interesting because in these kind of cases, the Bible will say you go and talk to the person first, and if the person doesn't listen, you bring another person. Person doesn't listen, then you go and talk to the leaders. The leader doesn't, then you go and preach it to the church. But in this case, because hypocrisy was something that was not tolerated, he said, I said it in front of them all. You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile, and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? And I think that there is a little issue when we read these kind of verses. Is that we read the verse and we are like, okay, so the issue is that Peter was a Jew, but he was not living like a Jew, but he was asking other people to live like a Jew. Well, do I live like a Jew? No. Do I obey the law? No. Okay, so that doesn't apply to me. There's nothing that I need to do about it. It's a different context, different situation, different problem. Okay, let's go to the next chapter or the next book. So I thought about that sometimes we don't relate to these kind of situations because they are talking in words, and languages and contexts that we're not living right now. So I want to put it in perspective. I want to change some of the words that this phrase and this line is asking with the same implications and the same things with the same context, but in a way that it applies to us, to the present, right now. So it's maybe talking to us in a personal way. And it's not to say that the questions and the way I'm going to change the phrases from Paul, I'm not saying that that's actually what you're going through. I'm just saying it's just a reflection. To read that phrase, that verse, and maybe think if we were doing something about that. Bringing it to the present, not necessarily saying that it's happening to you, but just to reflect. Are we okay with that? Are you giving me permission to do that? Paul, do you give me permission? I guess so. Okay, so I want you to listen to the questions. Let me read again the way Paul said, and I'm going to read the questions. After that, I'm done. Verse 14 says, when I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of them all, you are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? Here's the way I put it in different words. You are a Christian, yet you live like a non-Christian. How is it then that you want non-Christians to follow Christians' customs? Good. Yep. You are a Christian, yet you don't behave like a Christian. How is it then that you expect non-Christians to behave like Christians? You are a Christian, so you have been saved. How is it then that you are condemning other people? You are a Christian, so you have received the love of God by grace. How is it then that you don't love other people and yourself? My heart is like, last one. You're a Christian thanks to the gospel of Jesus Christ. How is it then that you and your actions are preaching a different gospel? Let's think about it. God bless you.